Now, electoral cycles in Nigeria have experienced various hiccups at different stages, of course, pre or post-election. Now, hate speeches, fake news, amongst other electoral risks often result in unintended electoral consequences, whether it's still before or after. Now, as the 2019 general elections gradually draw closer, one major challenge that is getting the attention of everyone is a need for the election to not to be seen just to be free and fair, but credible, and should also be devoid of any form of violence. To this end, sensitizing the citizens and indeed all key players before, during and after the election for the peace and unity of the country is imperative. Now, one can say that the collaboration between Peace and Security Network, that's the body, with the Fund for Peace and the United States Institute for Peace to bring political parties on to the round table for the purpose of preventing electoral violence is timely as activities for the 2019 general election gathers momentum. Now, what are the causes of violence in election? Well, you have the answers, don't you? Now, what measures can be adopted to stem the tide? This is our focus on Nigeria today. My name is Blessing Abu. Welcome to the program. Now, joining me in the studio to discuss this topic, preventing electoral violence, I'd like to welcome to the studio Mr. Adeolu Adewumi. He's the National Coordinator of Peace and Security Network. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
And joining him on set is Patricia Taft. She is Program Director of the Fund for Peace United States. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
And it's not your first time in Nigeria, but I say Barakadizwa. Both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, yes, for us, we're actually concerned with these aspects of election, which is key. Violence-free, that is what we've always looked at. But free, fair, and credible election, are they just what we need to maintain a credible election? Patricia.
I would say, as far as looking at incidents of violence and how they affect the credibility of an election, from the research that my organization, the Fund for Peace, has been doing, which has been done in partnership with the U.S. Institute of Peace and also with the PIN Foundation in the Niger Delta. In Nigeria, election violence does not occur in a vacuum. It does not occur devoid of political, social, and economic factors. And I think we have a tendency, both within Nigeria and also as the international community, to try to often treat election violence as these one-off manifestations that seem to occur. When it's usually, in our research and our find, it's usually much more symptomatic of a larger problem, of a more systematic problem. And so when we look at election violence without understanding the context in which it's occurring, it often leads to this game of what we call in the United States whack-a-mole, you know, where something pops its head up and you kind of slap it down and do it again and again, without really looking at what's driving this, what's driving these incidents and manifestations of violence.
I'll take off from there. What's driving this? Just does it exist in a vacuum, like she's already pointed out? What are those observations over time that you're bringing to the fore with your conference?
Thank you so much once again. There's several factors that influences or triggers electoral violence. Recently there's been the conversation around vote buying, vote selling. There's also been much more prominent conversation around hate speech, fake news, and we have gone ahead to intensify advocacy around fake advertorials and hate campaigns. I mean, these are things that are factors. These are factors that influence electoral violence, and I mean there are several of them, but then just to mention a few. And over the years, looking back at 2011, 2015, hate speech was one thing that characterized the electoral process within those periods. And unfortunately, when these things are premeditated, obviously, when these things are used or brought up in the open, unfortunately, we cannot determine the implications, the extent to which the far-reaching implications of what we say or what we do, I mean, regarding hate speech, I mean, regarding fake news campaigns, among other things. So, in essence, we have come as a network to see how we can proactively engage the critical stakeholders towards the 2019 elections to prevent this scenario of using hate speeches to trigger violence, among other things. Again, when you're talking to the actors in the electoral process, I mean, nobody wants to claim that they're using hate speech. I mean, nobody would agree that they're using hate speech. But when emotion sets in and everybody wants a winner, winner takes it all. Sets into it comes into the whole process. You begin to see these things manifest. But we're trying to tell them that, look, if we don't learn from the past, then we repeat the mistake for the future.
All right, let's take a look at some of this obvious frustration. When we talk about this, when we bring on such advocacy, such as we're doing now, long before even the electoral year starts, at least, when we had that of 2015, we felt, okay, at least going forward, things should begin to get better. But it will appear the more we're doing that, it's as if we're just having drops of water in the ocean, which is not good for everyone who is involved. Now, you've just talked about all the key actors, talk to them. Everyone seems to be pointing, no, it's in that direction, forgetting the four other fingers are pointing at you. So how, or what kind of tools are you employing to actually address some of this frustration that we've seen so far? And what are those concerted efforts, really, that we need to galvanize? Let's get back to you.
Yes, thank you. I think from my time and work in Nigeria and also working with the PSN and other organizations, first off, again, just to that point where we seem to be repeating a cycle or reinventing the wheel every single time, I think we have to, again, open our aperture as a camera a little bit wider to understand some of the driving factors. But what we have found in our research pretty much is that the most critical component in election violence prevention is having functioning platforms where people can network and where people can speak to each other, and having those platforms up and running and available. And the Peace and Security Network is an example of a multi-stakeholder platform, is what we call it. They've got representation from civil society, from grassroots organizations, from the political donor organizations, partners, et cetera, et cetera.
How strong some of those areas that you have been able to move into? How strong are this?
In terms of, I'll start by, just looking at the membership and other cutting across the 6th geopolitical zone in Nigeria. It has a steering committee of about 8 members, the USAID, Fund for Peace, Clean Foundation, and Mercy Corps, and a few others. And we have over 600 members in terms of, I'm talking about organizations now, international organizations, local, national organizations, and even diplomatic missions to coordinate efforts around conflict prevention and peace building. And it was established in 2013, and it's been active. It was very active towards the 2015 elections, and right now we're in the field.
Stronger. What asks that? Because I know, of course, there are local capacities that are already in place that you are having your collaboration with. So how far-reaching are some of these collaborative efforts, and what kind of synergy would you require to actually address some of these concerns like she has raised and you have observed?
I give you an example. If, for instance, the confab we just held, some of the key highlights, key points that came out of that confab, if we're looking at implementation, if we're looking at monitoring, we obviously leverage on the membership at the local level also. More often than not, I say this here, you hear politicians say all politics are local, but you never hear them say, all security are local, unfortunately. But then we are very much concerned about local security. We're very much concerned about peace building at the local level. So we are engaging with the critical players at the local level to ensure that the dissemination of this information are actually monitored and followed through at that level, not just limiting everything to Abuja. So that, most of the violence and concerns that we have today, actually, the offtake is usually at the local level and the state level. So we want to stay engaged at that level and ensure that we don't have the ripple effect at the national level. So we're very much in touch with the local players, the members at the local level, and we're building on this network, we're building on this partnership across board. Recently, we just inaugurated the Southwest Zonal Coordination under the West African Network for Peace Building that is coordinating that. So these are integrative efforts to ensure that we're all working together.
Okay. So let's look at other further integration. Patricia, I know prevention as a growing norm is something we need to actually build on. Now, what other efforts, at least being employed outside, that's at least outside this kind of a domain that we could actually borrow or even kind of adopt that will work better if some of those, at least if we share, if we compare notes, at least from where your own climb and for some other areas that you've observed, different from what we have here.
I certainly won't speak from the United States political experience at the moment, but I will from some other countries and lessons learned,
especially on the continent.
Of course, on the continent. What I've seen in my work over the past 15 years is, again, it's sharing of information that is so critical. And Nigeria, along with Kenya and South Africa, but in particular Nigeria is really a leader as far as collecting data and information on what's happening, particularly around elections. Very active civil society, very well-trained civil society, particularly when it comes to early warning. Excellent. Some of the best resources on the continent are here in Nigeria. What's missing is the networking piece. Okay. What I've seen here is that people tend to work in silos, right? And they don't talk to each other and they don't communicate. And there's different reasons for that. Sometimes it's competition over funding, or sometimes it's, people are busy.
Is that a setback for us?
I feel like in some places it is. It's getting better. It's improving with things like the PSN, with platforms down in the Niger Delta, like the PIN Foundation platform. There's a branch of the PSN down in the Niger Delta. But what I've learned, and in my experience and the experience of the Fund for Peace, is that information sharing is critical. And also, to your point, sharing this information early enough is critical. I think with election violence, what we often tend to do, and not just in Nigeria, but in other countries as well, what we often tend to do is we wait until the very last minute to get involved. And if we can acknowledge that most of the factors that are driving violence and these episodes of violence are deep-seated, are systemic, we can start addressing them a lot earlier on. And our research has shown that most incidents of election violence in Nigeria are not spontaneous; they're orchestrated. And by orchestrated, I mean they're planned. They may appear in their manifestation to be spontaneous, but they're not. And most orchestrated election violence happens in the months and years leading up to an election, and particularly in local elections, which we have found are much more violent than national level contests. And there's a lot of attention on national level contests, but it's really local level, particularly gubernatorial elections. But what we have found is that bringing people together early on, and not just specifically training for how to mitigate, election violence, but also empowering not just civil society, but security services, government employees with conflict resolution skills, conflict mediation skills, negotiation skills, things like this. Doing that early on enough and bringing people together with a network like the Peace and Security Network, we found across the continent and also in Nigeria, that works. That works. It doesn't prevent all of the violence, of course not, but you have the capacity to respond to the incidents of violence, and that's critical.
All right. Before you come, she talked about creation of early warning systems. What other risk assessments have you done, and also aspects of training, even some of those people that will be looking after the concerns, whether security, whether other kind of monitoring, as long as it's electoral process system? What other areas are you looking at in terms of risk assessment?
No, I mean, the basic thing is to ensure that there's a forum where conversation, can be made.
But there are, or it's not very effective?
Not very effective, but in some cases there are. They are very effective, especially, like you mentioned, in the Niger Delta. And in few other places where there's an effective, there's a platform where the security agencies, the civil society organizations, and several others come together to share ideas.
It should be long before the election.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And you see, just also adding to what she just said, one of the gaps that we've observed in the field is people, yes, working in silos. But what we're intensifying now and advocating is that there is power in collective advocacy. The recent events, in Jos, in terms of early response, it was as a result of some people having just information and holding on to it, or just working with the information and not following up on the information. And it's also because one organization has information and is not sharing that information with several others. So what we're doing is we're ensuring that civil society organizations and several other actors are working together, are working in sync, that information should be shared across and advocacy should be done collectively. So that if there's a gap anywhere, you can influence and monitor the process together. There is, if you're talking to a state government, for instance, and you're going as an individual organization, you may not have the desired impact. But then when you are doing it as a collective of several organizations, it speaks volumes. That is what we're advocating, especially on the Peace and Security Network. Yes, we cannot have everybody on board, but then we want to ensure that we are working together as a collective for the peace and security of Nigeria, which is very critical. In some cases, the conversations are done without, the security agencies, because then before you conduct an advocacy engagement, you need to have the critical information, and it should be based on evidence. It should also be based on critical facts. You don't just go and engage people without your facts at hand. So what we're doing, what happens in some cases is ensure that, okay, yes, you have your facts in place before you can engage the critical actors. In some other instances, the critical actors are part of the process of developing this whole scenario.
Okay, let's take a look at some of the people you had at the conference. Of course, I know you had the political parties, perhaps, or maybe other interest groups as well. What kind of conversation did you hold, and what were the body? Is one thing to say something, is a different body language you start experiencing. What were your observation, and what more did they require from you as well?
I must give credit to the Inter-Party Advisory Council team. The recently elected chairman, he was present. He was, they were active at the confab. The essence of convening the confab was to engage the political parties, for them to tell us what they're doing to prevent violence, not for us to tell them. What usually happens is, we don't want you to engage in hate speech, and it's very easy for them to say, no, we won't. So in essence, we wanted to hear from them and how we can work with them as partners for common messaging and common narrative.
When we get back from this break, we're going on a break now. What more we could do, or what more they requested of you, that's bodies like yours, as well as what they think we could do to actually get a better electoral process? Will be after this break. You're watching Nigeria Today. We'll be right back after this break.
The Nigerian Television Authority News 24 channel, your dependable all-round news station, offering you world-class news programs, documentaries, spotlights, promos and information highlights. Take advantage of our network reach and advertise your interest, goods and services with us. NTA News 24, first equals with digital broadcasting. You can reach us on channel 21 terrestrial TV and channel 101 on the Star Times platform. For more inquiries, please call Coretta 0803 618 9986 or Henry on 0803 379 0884. Join us today.
Yes, welcome back. If you just tuned in, the program is Nigeria Today, and we're looking at preventing electoral violence for democracy to actually stay well. I still have my guest seated, Adiolu Adewumi, National Coordinator, Peace and Security Network, and also Patricia, she's a Program Director, the Fund for Peace United States. Now, you already started talking about some of your research findings, and I know evaluating some of those areas is of greater concern to you as well. How do we begin to marshal out some of those areas to impact on what we need to see come 2019?
Well, I mean, obviously, as we're seeing right now, what's happening in Ocean State, you know, a lot of these things are still occurring and are still in the system and are still happening. I think, again, as my colleague Ade said, and as my organization advocates, basically the main recommendations that came out of our research is that there needs to be a lot more planning and investment in prevention, right, and in early warning. That's really
key
big.
For you.
If we don't know until the very last minute, then what can we do? Can we be prepared? And even though it's too late in some senses to turn back the clock, in some senses for 2019, I would say that what Nigeria has is it has the data, it has the information, it has the platforms, and it certainly has the passion and the advocacy for this topic. So I think that we really need to focus on early identification, and by early I mean early. I mean not just 6 months out, but a year out. We need to recognize that violence is orchestrated more often than it is spontaneous. And what we see a lot is that there's a lot of investment early on, 6 months out, trying to prevent spontaneous violence. Well, spontaneous violence tends to occur after the election results are announced, like 2011, what happened in Kaduna, or in the aftermath. And so there tends to be a lot of investment in preventing spontaneous violence in the lead up, but that's actually where orchestrated violence happens. And then people, right after the election results are announced, tend to say, okay, that's it. And we're leaving the party way too early. We're not staying long enough, and we're not starting early enough. And we're not investing in the power of organizations that have built up trust and have convening power, like the Peace and Security Network, like the PIN Foundation in the Niger Delta. There are others. We need to really pay attention and invest. Maybe it's not as sexy sometimes as some of these other electoral violence prevention programs. We want to invest in a platform of networking and convening. But these individuals and these networks, they have built trust. And trust is critical in the critical of prevention of election violence. So that would be my main recommendation.
Let's do more to evaluating the metrics actually for this preventive success, and address exactly those underlying areas of these conflicts where they erupt from. What more do you want to say?
It's important to put it on the table that if we don't invest in peace, we will pay more for violence. Very important. Before aspirants emerge, before candidates emerge in parties, before winners and losers emerge in parties, they come under the influence of a political party. And we believe that political party leaders can play a greater role in preventing electoral violence around off-cycle or the general elections that is coming. So there's so much more demand from them that they need to be able to put, in terms of sensitization, in terms of checks, in terms of monitoring their members, and the kind of messaging, very critical. So if you look at the trend, and you're wondering, okay, why do we have, spikes of violence, in some instances, and political parties are not able to put their members to check? It is as a result of people not also wanting to take responsibilities.
So how do we make the people take responsibility? Because it's not just about the leadership now.
Yeah.
If you have credible followers who know, who have the advocacy, the right education, the right enlightenment, definitely, they will still put their leaders to check. Wouldn't it be so?
Yeah, absolutely. They would still put their leaders to check. So it is more or less a symbiotic relationship. You're expecting your followers to, act in certain ways, and you're expecting your leaders to also act in certain ways. So it's a matter of what you give is what you get. They also know, obviously, they know what transpires internally. But what we're saying and what we're advocating is that political parties can do much more going into 2019 elections. And like I said initially, our political leaders, they need to change their rhetoric and begin to look at how
change the rhetoric, the conversation will be all right. Adiolu Adewumi, National Coordinator, Peace and Security Network. Thank you for coming on the program. Thank you for your insight as well. So also like to appreciate Patricia Taft, Program Director of the Fund for Peace United States. Thank you. It was a great delight talking with you.
Thank you for having me.
All right. I will also appreciate you for watching. Join us again tomorrow for another edition of the program. That will be 7:30 in the evening. My name is Blessing Abu. Enjoy the rest of your evening.